"Ma'am, this courtroom is for people who belong here," Officer Daniel Mercer said with a laugh that rolled too easily across the polished wood, and for half a second, it sounded like everyone in the room had been given permission to look at her the same way he did. Naomi Brooks didn't answer right away. She stood near the last row in a charcoal dress that fell just below her knees, one hand resting lightly on the strap of her leather bag, the other holding a slim folder against her side. She looked like someone who had arrived early, someone quiet, someone easy to dismiss. The courtroom itself carried that cold morning stillness only government buildings seem to know how to keep, the faint hum of old air vents, the dry smell of paper and floor polish, the seal of the state mounted high above the empty bench like a promise too many people had already stopped believing in. A few lawyers glanced up from their files, then away. A court reporter adjusted her machine without lifting her head. Near the front, a teenage defendant in a wrinkled button-down sat at the defense table with his shoulders pulled in tight, while his mother twisted a tissue in both hands until it looked ready to tear. Mercer stood by the rail in full uniform, broad in the chest, casual in the way men got when they were used to owning a room before anyone official told them to. "You hear me," he said, smiling wider now, as if his own voice amused him. "Proceedings haven't started. Visitors wait quietly, and they don't interrupt what they don't understand." That got him a few thin smiles from the people who knew better than to laugh too hard in a courtroom. Naomi's eyes moved to his nameplate, Daniel Mercer, polished enough to catch the overhead light. She read it once, calmly, as though she were storing it somewhere permanent. Then she lifted her gaze to him, and there was nothing dramatic in her face, nothing loud, nothing angry, just a stillness that didn't fit the role he had already assigned her. That was what unsettled him first, though he would not have known how to name it. Most people, when embarrassed in public, rush to explain themselves. They looked down. They shrank. Naomi did neither. She simply took in the room the way one might take in weather, the young assistant district attorney riffling papers too quickly, the clerk at the side desk checking the wall clock, the bailiff near the back door pretending not to listen, the empty judge's chair raised above them all in dark carved wood, waiting. Mercer followed her glance and chuckled again. "Don't worry," he said, nodding toward the bench. "You'll know when the important people get here." The words landed, and the room went strangely thinner after that, as though the air had been pulled too tight. Somewhere in the hallway outside, heels clicked against tile and faded. Inside, no one moved much. Naomi shifted the folder in her hand and stepped forward exactly one pace, enough for the light from the tall side windows to catch the edge of the paper she carried. "Officer Mercer," she said at last, her voice low, level, and clear enough to cut through every whispered assumption in the room. "That depends on what you think important means." And just like that, without anyone quite understanding why, his smile stopped looking so comfortable. For a beat, nobody spoke. The words did not sound loud, but they settled over the courtroom with the weight of something official, something that did not need volume to be felt. Officer Daniel Mercer let out a short breath through his nose and shifted his stance, one hand resting near his duty belt, his expression trying to hold on to amusement even as it started to thin around the edges. He had expected embarrassment, maybe apology, maybe silence. What he got instead was a woman who sounded as if she had all the time in the world. Naomi Brooks stepped no closer after that first measured pace. She did not need to. The room had already leaned toward her without meaning to. At the defense table, Marcus Reed lifted his eyes for the first time since Mercer had spoken. He was 19 at most, with the kind of tired face that belonged on someone twice that age. And there was something fragile in the way hope moved across it, like a match struck in wind. Beside him, his attorney straightened a stack of papers that did not need straightening. Near the clerk's desk, Evelyn Hart finally looked up fully from her screen. Her fingers stopped over the keyboard. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but Naomi saw it. She also saw the way Evelyn's gaze fell, not on her face, but on the folder in her hand, then returned again with a flicker too quick for most people to catch. Mercer caught it too, and it bothered him more than he wanted it to. "Important means people withstanding," he said, still smiling. But now the smile had corners in it. "Not spectators who think they can wander in here and play lawyer." Naomi lowered her eyes to the folder, opened it with unhurried precision, and slid one page forward with her thumb. The paper gave a soft whisper in the silence. "Interesting," she said, Because according to the arrest report filed at 11:42 last night, your standing seems to depend on facts that keep changing. The assistant district attorney looked up so fast that a pen rolled off his table and tapped the floor. Mercer's jaw tightened for the smallest fraction of a second. You do not have access to that file, he said. Naomi tilted her head, not mocking him, not helping him either. Then you might want to ask yourself why I do. The air shifted again. It was there in the rustle of suit jackets, in the way the court reporter paused before setting her fingers back on the keys, in the way Marcus's mother stopped twisting the tissue and simply held it still in both hands. Through the high windows, late morning lights stretched across the floor in pale bars, catching the dust no one noticed until a room went quiet enough. Mercer glanced toward Evelyn. Clerk, he said, sharper now, we are not doing this. Get security and clear the gallery. Evelyn did not move. That was when the first real crack showed. Not in Naomi. In him. It passed through his voice like a hitch in bad wiring. Naomi closed the folder halfway and looked toward the empty bench, then back to Mercer. You have had quite a morning already, she said softly. I would be careful about asking the room to pay closer attention. And somewhere behind the side door near Chambers, a latch clicked open. The sound was small, almost polite, but in a courtroom even a quiet latch could carry authority. Every head turned toward the side door. Officer Daniel Mercer did not move at first, as if refusing to acknowledge what his instincts had already understood. Naomi Brooks remained exactly where she was, one hand resting on the open folder, the other loose at her side, her posture calm in that almost unnerving way people carried themselves when they did not need a room's permission. The door opened just a few inches, then wider, and a young clerk from Chambers stepped through with a legal pad pressed to his chest. He crossed to Evelyn Hart quickly and leaned down to whisper in her ear. Naomi did not look at him. She looked instead at the empty bench, at the state seal above it, at the flag in the corner barely stirring under the old vent, as if the room itself were waiting to see who would break first. Evelyn listened without blinking. Then she stood. The scrape of her chair against the floor sounded louder than it should have. Mercer turned toward her with a forced laugh that landed nowhere. Come on, he said, spreading one hand. We are seriously going to pause a criminal hearing for this. Evelyn did not answer him. She picked up a thin cream-colored envelope from her desk, checked the seal, then looked directly at Naomi for the briefest moment. It was not surprise anymore. It was recognition, followed by something closer to relief. At the defense table, Marcus Reed swallowed hard and glanced at his attorney, who suddenly seemed far more interested in the front of the room than in the notes he had spent the last 10 minutes pretending to review. The assistant district attorney shifted in his chair and cleared his throat, but did not speak. He had the uneasy look of a man realizing the script in his head no longer matched the stage in front of him. Mercer saw all of it. Naomi could tell by the way the color in his face changed, not dramatically, just enough to make him look less polished, less certain, less like a man who had walked in expecting to be the loudest voice until lunch. Officer, Naomi said, her tone almost conversational. You might want to stop talking while the record is still being kind to you. The court reporter's fingers froze above the keys. Mercer stared at Naomi as if he could force her back into the smaller role he had chosen for her the moment he saw her. Who exactly do you think you are? He asked. It came out harder than before, but it also came out thinner, stretched by something he was trying not to feel. Naomi closed the folder fully this time and held it against her side. Someone who reads before she speaks, she said. Then she looked toward Evelyn. That was all it took. Evelyn drew a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped out from behind the desk. Her voice, when it came, was steady enough to stop every loose sound in the room. All rise. The words seemed to hit Mercer a full second later than everyone else. Chairs moved back. Fabric rustled. Marcus stood so fast his knee brushed the underside of the table. His mother rose with both hands pressed flat against the wooden rail in front of her. Even the assistant district attorney pushed back his chair and got to his feet, eyes fixed now on Naomi with the stunned, dawning caution of a man replaying the last 5 minutes in his head and finding each one worse than the one before it. Mercer remained still for half a heartbeat too long. Then he turned toward the bench, then back to Naomi, and something inside his expression finally gave way. Naomi did not hurry. She handed her folder to the clerk from Chambers, smoothed one sleeve with quiet precision, and began walking toward the front of the courtroom in measured steps, the sound of her heels soft against the polished floor, each one landing like a fact no one could take back. By the time Naomi Brooks reached the steps to the bench, the room no longer felt like the same place Officer Daniel Mercer had laughed in a minute earlier. The change was not loud. It lived in smaller things than that, in the way people held their shoulders, in the care with which chairs had been pushed back, in the silence that now seemed to expose every careless word that had been spoken under it. Naomi climbed the short set of steps with an ease that came from long practice, not performance. She did not turn to measure the reaction behind her. She did not need to. She could feel it moving through the courtroom like a current, disbelief first, then recognition, then the slow, cold understanding that certain moments could not be rewound once they had happened in public. The clerk from Chambers met her at the side of the bench and handed over the folder she had carried in from the back row. On top of it sat a black robe, neatly folded. Naomi set the folder down, slipped one arm into the robe, and then the other, the fabric falling into place with quiet precision. There was nothing theatrical about it. That was what made it devastating. Mercer stared as if the sight itself were refusing to fit inside his mind. The smile he had worn all morning was gone now, not replaced by apology, not yet, only by the strained blankness of a man trying to calculate consequences faster than they were arriving. Naomi took her seat and adjusted the papers in front of her. When she finally looked up, her expression was composed, almost gentle, but it was the kind of gentleness that came from control, not softness. "Be seated," she said. The room obeyed at once. Chairs slid back into place. Marcus Reed lowered himself slowly, eyes still fixed on the bench, as though he was afraid the scene might disappear if he blinked too hard. His mother sat beside him with both hands over her mouth, tears bright but unfallen. At the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Ryan Cole opened his file, closed it, then opened it again, buying himself seconds that were not going to help. Mercer remained standing until the bailiff gave him a quiet look that he seemed to feel more than see. Then he sat, stiff-backed, his hands flat on his knees. Naomi let the silence settle before she spoke again. "For the record," she said, "I am Judge Naomi Brooks, assigned to this matter as of 8:15 this morning after an administrative reassignment from courtroom 7. Her voice moved cleanly through the room, clear enough to leave no shelter for confusion. She lowered her gaze to the folder, then lifted a single page. "I arrived early because I prefer to review a case before I hear people perform it." No one moved at that. Even the air vents seemed quieter. Naomi turned one page, then another. "Mr. Cole, before we proceed, I would like clarification on why the prosecution packet before me contains an arrest report timestamped at 11:42 p.m., while dispatch records submitted to Chambers at 8:03 this morning reflect officer contact beginning at 11:31 p.m. and list no weapon alert, no flight risk flag, and no request for supplemental units." Ryan Cole swallowed. Mercer did not. He had gone beyond swallowing. He had gone still in the particular way people did when they realized the ground beneath them had already started giving way. Naomi looked directly at him then, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the calm attention of someone separating fact from fiction one line at a time. "Officer Mercer," she said, "a courtroom is not a place where confidence can substitute for truth. So before we go any further, I suggest you choose your next words with far more care than your earlier ones." For the first time that morning, Officer Daniel Mercer did not seem to have an answer ready. He sat with his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the edge of the bench, as if looking directly at Judge Naomi Brooks might make the silence around him even worse. Naomi let that silence do its work. She had learned a long time ago that people revealed more in the space after a question than in the question itself. The courtroom held still under the pale wash of late morning light. A fluorescent fixture near the back gave off a faint electric hum. Somewhere in the hallway outside, a cart rolled past and faded. Inside, every small sound seemed magnified. The turn of a page, the clearing of a throat, the soft tap of the court reporter resettling her hands. Naomi opened the folder in front of her and drew out 3 documents, aligning them with the careful precision of someone who respected paper because paper had a memory longer than pride. "Let us begin with something simple," she said, her voice even. "At 7:12 this morning, Chambers received a supplemental packet concerning the arrest of Marcus Reed. That packet included dispatch logs, body camera inventory, and a custody sheet. I reviewed them before entering this room. She lifted the first page. The dispatch log shows initial contact at 11:31 p.m. outside a convenience store on West Halston. She set it down and lifted the second. Your arrest report states 11:42 p.m. near the corner of West Halston and Pine. Then the third. And the custody sheet places the transfer at 11:49 p.m., which gives this court exactly 7 minutes to account for officer contact, detention, transport, and booking initiation. That is a very efficient night, Officer Mercer. No one laughed. Ryan Cole shifted in his seat and reached for his copy of the file with the look of a man suddenly discovering he should have read every page twice. Marcus Reed sat motionless, but Naomi saw his fingers curl against the table edge, not in panic now, but in concentration, as if he were trying to understand whether this was real. His mother had stopped crying altogether. She was simply watching, wide-eyed and silent, like someone afraid to breathe too loudly in case Hope might leave the room. Mercer finally spoke. There was confusion at the scene, he said. The confidence was still there, but thinner now, stretched over something brittle. A fast-moving situation. Times are not always exact in the field. Naomi gave a small nod, as though granting him the courtesy of hearing himself fully. That would be more persuasive, she said, if the body camera index did not show a recorded start time of 11:28 p.m. The words landed clean and cold. Ryan Cole looked up sharply. Evelyn Hart lowered her eyes to hide the change in her expression, but it was there all the same. Mercer stared. Naomi continued before he could recover. I also noticed that the body camera file itself is not attached, only the inventory receipt showing that it exists. Which raises a question this court takes very seriously. If the footage supports your report, why was it not submitted with it? Mercer opened his mouth, then closed it. The room seemed to narrow around him. Naomi folded her hands lightly over the papers. I came in early because this case had too many seams showing before the hearing even began, she said. And when a young man's freedom is on the line, this court does not ignore loose stitching simply because someone in uniform tells a smooth story. Then she looked directly at Marcus Reed for the first time, and when she spoke again, her tone was softer, but no less exact. We are going to take our time now, and we are going to get this right. Ryan Cole looked down at his papers again, but this time he was not pretending. He flipped through the packet with quick, careful fingers, scanning page numbers, timestamps, initials in the margins, trying to find a version of the morning that would still hold together under Judge Naomi Brooks's eyes. It was not there. Naomi watched him for a moment, then turned one page in her own file and rested her hand lightly on the corner. Mr. Cole, she said, did your office review the underlying digital evidence before appearing on this matter today? The question was simple. That was what made it dangerous. Cole straightened in his chair, his face caught between professionalism and the sudden fear of being tied to someone else's carelessness. Your Honor, my office reviewed the submitted arrest package, he said carefully. The body camera footage was listed as available through evidence control, but had not yet been physically transferred to the court file. Naomi gave a slow nod. So the answer is no. The assistant district attorney did not argue. Across the aisle, Officer Daniel Mercer shifted in his seat and looked toward the prosecution table with a flicker of irritation that came too late to be useful. Naomi saw it and filed it away with everything else. Very well, she said. Then let us stay with what was submitted. She lifted the arrest report again, her gaze moving over the typed lines. The room was so quiet that the soft turn of paper sounded almost ceremonial. Officer Mercer, your report states that Mr. Reed made what you describe as a threatening movement toward his waistband, creating immediate concern that he may have been armed. Is that your testimony this morning? Mercer answered more quickly now, as if speed could rebuild ground he had already lost. Yes, Your Honor. He made a suspicious motion. I acted to secure the situation. Naomi did not react right away. Sunlight from the high windows had shifted slightly, laying a pale rectangle across the defense table where Marcus Reed sat completely still, his expression caught between dread and disbelief. His mother stared at the bench as if she had anchored her whole body to Naomi's voice. Interesting, Naomi said at last. Because dispatch records show no weapon alert. No request for backup based on an armed subject. No notation of a pat-down recovery. No field supervisor call. And your custody sheet lists personal property intake as one wallet, one key ring, and one cell phone. She raised her eyes to Mercer. No metallic object. No weapon. No seized item even remotely resembling one. Mercer's throat moved. It happened fast. Naomi's voice remained calm, but it had sharpened, like glass held to the light. Fast is not the same as unclear, officer. You used the phrase threatening movement. That phrase carries weight in this courtroom. It justifies escalation. It shapes charging decisions. It follows a defendant into plea negotiations, bail review, and sometimes years beyond one bad night. So I will ask you once more, plainly. What exactly did you see? Mercer opened his mouth and paused, and in that pause the whole room seemed to lean in. Naomi did not fill the silence for him. She let it widen. Finally he said, I believed he was reaching for something metallic. Naomi glanced down at the dispatch log, then back up. Believed, she repeated softly. Not saw. No one in the room missed the difference. Ryan Cole closed his eyes for one brief second. Evelyn Hart lowered her pen and folded her hands. The court reporter resumed typing with renewed precision, each keystroke sounding suddenly important. Naomi set the arrest report aside and folded her hands over the bench. A courtroom is not a place for guesses dressed as facts, she said. And today, Officer Mercer, your language is beginning to sound dressed. Officer Daniel Mercer tried to laugh again, but this time the sound came out dry and short, more reflex than confidence. It did not travel through the room the way it had before. It dropped at his own feet and stayed there. With respect, Your Honor, he said, and the respect in it felt borrowed. Street encounters are not courtroom seminars. You make judgments in real time. You read body language. You read intent. Judge Naomi Brooks regarded him without blinking. The bench gave her height, but it was not the height that changed the room. It was the fact that she did not rush to fill his excuses for him. She let each word sit in the open where everyone could see exactly what it was worth. Intent, she repeated softly, as if testing the shape of it. That is a serious word, officer. At the defense table, Marcus Reed lowered his eyes for a moment, then lifted them again. Naomi noticed the movement. She noticed how young he looked when fear was not forcing him into stillness, how his collar sat slightly crooked, how one cuff button had been fastened wrong in haste. Beside him, his attorney leaned forward now, fully awake at last, one hand poised above a yellow legal pad that had gone mostly untouched until this morning began unraveling in public. Ryan Cole sat more rigidly than before, the neat order of his prosecution file no longer offering him much comfort. Naomi turned one page in the packet and traced a line with the tip of her finger. Let us speak plainly, she said. You did not report seeing a weapon. You did not recover a weapon. You did not request support consistent with an armed encounter. Yet you selected language designed to imply danger after the fact. Mercer's mouth tightened. I reported what I perceived. Naomi lifted her eyes. Did you? The question was quiet enough to make the whole room lean toward it. Mercer shifted in his seat. He matched the pattern. The moment the words left him, the air changed. Not dramatically. More like a door opening somewhere deep inside the building, letting in a colder draft than the room was prepared for. Naomi did not move. Evelyn Hart did, but only with her eyes. Ryan Cole stared straight ahead, the muscles in his jaw briefly tightening. Marcus Reed went very still. His mother closed her eyes for a single second, as if she had heard something familiar and hated that she still recognized the sound of it. Naomi folded her hands. Matched what pattern, Officer Mercer? Her voice remained level, but there was steel beneath it now, clean and bright. Mercer seemed to realize too late that the phrase he had reached for so casually did not belong safely in this room. I meant behavior, he said quickly. Late hour. Nervous movement. Evasive attitude. Naomi tilted her head. Those are three different things, and none of them are a pattern. They are conclusions. Convenient ones. She let that settle, then continued. You laughed at this court before proceedings began because you assumed you understood who mattered in this room. I am beginning to think that assumption was not limited to the gallery. Mercer's face lost what little color it had left. The court reporter's keys moved in a steady, delicate rhythm, capturing every word with the patience of a machine that did not care who regretted being on the record later. Naomi glanced down at the packet once more, then toward Evelyn. Clerk Hart, she said, mark the officer's statement for review. Evelyn nodded. At once, Naomi returned her gaze to Mercer, and when she spoke again, her tone was almost kind, which made it land even harder. You are no longer explaining your report, officer. You are explaining yourself. The words did not leave much room to hide. Officer Daniel Mercer sat under them as if the air itself had grown heavier, and for several long seconds he seemed to understand that anything he said next would only reveal more of what the room had already begun to see. Judge Naomi Brooks did not press him immediately. She let the silence widen, because silence in a courtroom could do what argument never could. It stripped away performance. It left posture without protection. The late morning light had shifted again, laying a pale band across the railing where Marcus Reed's mother held both hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone nearly white. Marcus sat forward now, not by much, just enough to show that hope was no longer something happening far away from him. At the prosecution table, Ryan Cole looked down at his notes and then set his pen aside entirely, like a man admitting to himself that no quick annotation was going to rescue this hearing from what it had become. Naomi reached for the evidence packet and drew out a single sheet from the back. The paper was thinner than the others, a printed inventory log with black barcodes along the edge. She studied it for a moment, then looked toward the clerk's desk. "Ms. Hart," she said, "please confirm for the record whether the body camera file associated with this arrest was checked into evidence control." Evelyn Hart glanced at her monitor, typed 3 quick entries, and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Logged at 1:14 a.m. under the arrest number in this case. 1 active digital file, 1 backup copy, both currently held by evidence control." Naomi let her eyes return to Mercer. "So the footage exists. It was preserved. It was available. Yet it was not furnished to the court this morning." Mercer straightened. "That is not my responsibility," he said. "It came out too fast, sharper than he intended, and the room caught the edge of it." Naomi did not flinch. "No," she said, "but accuracy is." She placed the inventory sheet on top of the file and folded her hands. "This court does not speculate when evidence is sitting in a locked room downtown. Clerk Hart, contact evidence control and have the file transmitted immediately to chambers and this courtroom display." Evelyn nodded and reached for the phone at once. A faint pulse passed through the room. It was not excitement exactly. It was something tighter, more serious, the feeling of a door opening onto facts nobody could rearrange once they arrived. Mercer looked toward Ryan Cole as if expecting an objection, a delay, some procedural shield to rise on instinct. None came. Cole remained seated, his expression drawn and careful. He had the look of a man choosing survival over loyalty. Naomi watched that too. Then she shifted her attention to Marcus. When she spoke, her voice changed, not softer in authority, but warmer in direction. "Mr. Reed," she said, "you are not required to speak at this time, and you should not unless advised by counsel. But I want you to understand what is happening. This court is slowing this matter down because speed is often where truth gets mistreated." Marcus swallowed and gave one small nod. It was such a simple movement, but it seemed to touch something in the room that had been locked tight all morning. Naomi looked back at Mercer. "And while we wait," she said, "I suggest you use the next few minutes to decide whether you intend to correct the record before the record corrects you." The waiting changed the room more than any outburst could have. It took less than 2 minutes for stillness to start working on people. Judge Naomi Brooks could see it everywhere, in the way Assistant District Attorney Ryan Cole kept one hand flat on the table as though steadying himself against something invisible, in the way Marcus Reed's attorney finally leaned close to his client and whispered with the alert focus of a man who had gone from expecting routine damage control to sensing the first clean break in a bad case. In the way Officer Daniel Mercer stopped looking at the gallery altogether because there was no comfort left for him there. At the clerk's desk, Evelyn Hart spoke in a low voice into the phone, giving evidence control the case number, then repeating it, each digit crisp, each word deliberate, and when she hung up, she typed a short sequence into the courtroom terminal. A monitor mounted near the witness stand flickered from the county seal to a dark login screen waiting for a secure file transfer. Naomi watched the screen for a beat, then lowered her eyes to the papers in front of her. "For the record," she said, "this court is in a brief evidentiary pause pending receipt of digital material already preserved under the arrest number before us." Her voice settled over the room like a measured hand. No further substantive argument will be taken until that material arrives. Mercer shifted. It was small, the movement of a man trying not to look restless and failing anyway. Your Honor, he said, and the title sounded heavier now. I would like to clarify something. Naomi looked up. You would like to improve something, she said. Clarification depends on truth. A faint sound moved through the room. Not laughter, not exactly. Just the almost silent recognition that the balance had shifted so completely it could no longer pretend otherwise. Mercer kept his face forward. My wording may have been imprecise, he said. The suspect was acting evasive. I made a judgment call. Naomi leaned back slightly, the black robe falling in clean lines from her shoulders, her hands resting lightly on the bench. You have already revised your language once this morning, she said. You began with certainty. Then you moved to perception. Now you are calling it imprecision. That is not clarification, Officer Mercer. That is retreat. Ryan Cole closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them again. Marcus Reed stared at the defense table as though afraid to look too hopeful too soon. His mother looked at Naomi with tears gathered but controlled, the kind held back by years of learning that relief should never arrive before proof. Naomi turned one page in the file and spoke without raising her voice. Do you know what concerns me most? She asked. It is not merely the missing footage. It is how comfortable you were before the record began correcting you. You laughed in this courtroom because you thought the story was already safe in your hands. Mercer looked up then, finally, and there was something exposed in his face now, something rawer than embarrassment because it had less to do with status and more to do with being seen clearly by the one person in the room he had misjudged most. Naomi held his gaze only long enough to make the point, then turned toward the monitor as a soft tone sounded from the terminal. The dark screen shifted. A progress bar appeared. Evelyn Hart straightened in her seat. Ryan Cole sat up. Marcus stopped breathing for half a second. And in the pale hush of that courtroom, with the evidence finally beginning its slow arrival across county servers and courthouse wires, Naomi Brooks folded her hands and said, Good. Let us hear what the night remembers when people stop editing it. The progress bar moved with the slow, indifferent patience of a machine that had no reason to hurry for anyone's fear. Judge Naomi Brooks watched it fill while the courtroom held its breath around the soft glow of the monitor. 30%. 50. 72. Officer Daniel Mercer sat with his shoulders set too straight, as if posture alone might still save him. The confidence that had carried him through the morning was gone now, replaced by the brittle stillness of a man listening for the first crack in a wall he had leaned on for years. At the defense table, Marcus Reed did not move at all. His eyes stayed on the screen with the fixed intensity of someone who had been talked over too many times to trust relief before he could see it with his own eyes. His mother sat beside him with both hands folded beneath her chin, her tissue forgotten in her lap, her face lifted toward the monitor the way some people looked toward church windows. A soft tone sounded from the terminal. The transfer completed. Evelyn Hart clicked once, then again, and a video window opened against the dark background of the display. For a second, there was only frozen grain, a timestamp in the corner, the black and white county header, and the low static hiss that always seemed to make recorded truth feel colder than spoken truth. Naomi leaned slightly forward. Play it, she said. The body camera footage began with the shaky rhythm of an officer walking under streetlights. The image was washed in sodium gold, convenience store windows glowing across an almost empty parking lot, a soda machine humming somewhere near the entrance, the timestamp marking 11:28 p.m. clear as carved glass. Mercer appeared to hear it before he fully saw it. Naomi watched his jaw tighten. The audio was not dramatic. That was what made it powerful. No chaos. No shouting. No frantic rush that would explain errors made in panic. Just the ordinary sounds of a late night, tires passing in the distance, a store door opening and closing, a clerk's muffled voice from inside. Then Marcus Reed entered the frame near the edge of the lot, standing with both hands visible, a phone in one hand and a set of keys catching the parking lot light in the other. He looked young even on grainy video. Tired. Wary. More startled than threatening. Naomi said nothing. She let the footage speak in the plain, unadorned language of angles and time. Mercer's recorded voice came through the speakers, louder than it needed to be, asking a question the room could hear, but not miss the tone of. Marcus answered. His voice was low, respectful, uncertain in the way people sounded when they knew the wrong answer might not be the wrong answer for long. He raised the hand with the phone slightly, as if to show it. The metal glint in the frame came not from a weapon, not from something hidden at his waistband, but from the key ring turning once between his fingers under the lot lights. Ryan Cole inhaled sharply and then went still. Evelyn Hart stopped typing. Even the court reporter paused for one suspended moment before her hands returned to the keys. Naomi kept her eyes on the screen as the footage continued. No threatening motion. No sudden reach. No behavior that matched the language in the report. Just a tired young man standing under bad fluorescent light with a phone, a wallet chain at his hip, and keys in his hand. Naomi let the silence after that image settle over every person in the room. Then, without looking away from the monitor, she said, "Officer Mercer, the record appears to have found its memory." No one spoke after that. The footage had ended, but it still seemed to hang in the room, bright and inescapable, as if the screen had not gone dark so much as burned the truth into every face beneath it. Judge Naomi Brooks let the silence remain. She knew better than to rush past a moment like this. Some truths needed a second to settle into the bones before anyone could pretend not to feel them. Officer Daniel Mercer stared at the monitor with the blank, stunned expression of a man watching his own certainty collapse in public. The hard angles in his posture had not softened, but something in him had. It showed in the way his shoulders no longer looked squared with confidence, only held together by habit. At the prosecution table, Ryan Cole lowered his eyes to the file before him and exhaled once through his nose, slow and controlled, the way people did when they were trying to contain embarrassment inside professionalism. Marcus Reed did not look at the screen anymore. He looked at Naomi. There was caution in that look, but there was something else now too, something fragile and unfamiliar, as if justice had just stepped out of a story other people told and into the room where he had been waiting all morning. His mother reached for his hand under the table and held it there, both of them quiet, both of them afraid to move too fast inside a moment that still felt breakable. Naomi folded her hands over the bench. "Let the record reflect," she said, her voice calm enough to make everyone else's breathing sound louder, "that the court has reviewed body camera footage time-stamped 11:28 p.m. through initial officer contact, and the footage does not show any threatening motion consistent with the language used in the arrest report." Each word landed like a measured stone. No drama, no raised voice, just fact, arranged so cleanly there was nowhere left to hide. Ryan Cole rose slowly. He did not look at Mercer when he spoke. "Your Honor, in light of the footage just reviewed, the state requests a brief recess to reassess the evidentiary basis for proceeding on the present record." Naomi regarded him for a moment. "That request is late," she said, "but it is wiser than anything I have heard from your table so far." Cole accepted the rebuke without protest and sat back down. Mercer finally turned toward the bench. His voice, when it came, sounded smaller than it had all morning. "Your Honor, there may be context missing from the clip." Naomi's eyes settled on him with the kind of stillness that made evasion sound childish before it was even finished. "Context," she said softly. "You have used perception, imprecision, judgment call, and now context. It is remarkable how many words can arrive when the simple one refuses to." Mercer swallowed. Naomi leaned forward only slightly, but the shift seemed to pull the whole courtroom toward her. "You filed a report that implied danger where the video shows none. You used language that elevated suspicion into fact. And before this hearing even began, you found it amusing to measure who belonged in this room." She let that sit with him. "That combination concerns this court more than any single inconsistency on paper." Evelyn Hart wrote, without looking up. The court reporter's keys moved with renewed intensity, every sentence preserved now with cold mechanical patience. Naomi turned to Marcus Reed's attorney. "Counsel, prepare to address release conditions if appropriate." Then she looked back at Mercer. There was no anger in her face, only clarity, and somehow that was worse for him. "Officer Mercer," she said, "this morning you laughed before you understood who you were standing in front of. That was your first mistake. The second was believing the truth needed your help to become itself." Ryan Cole rose again, but the second time he stood there was no performance left in him, only the careful posture of a man trying to salvage what could still be saved from a record that had already turned against itself. He smoothed the front of his suit, glanced once at the body camera monitor that had gone dark, and then fixed his eyes on Judge Naomi Brooks. "Your Honor," he said, voice measured now. "The state moves to withdraw its request for detention at this time and asks for leave to review the charging decision pending further examination of the evidence." The words changed the room in a way nothing else had that morning. Marcus Reed blinked hard, as if he had heard them in another language first and needed a second for them to become real. His attorney put a steadying hand on his forearm under the table and nodded once, small and certain. Marcus's mother bowed her head, not in defeat this time, but in a quiet, shaky gratitude that seemed too deep for tears alone. Naomi looked at Cole for a long moment, weighing not only the request but the lateness of it. Then she turned a page in the file and set it neatly aside. "The motion is granted in part," she said. "The detention request is denied. Mr. Reed will be released on his own recognizance pending further review by the state, effective immediately after processing." A sound escaped Marcus's mother then, not loud, just a broken breath she had clearly been holding since before sunrise. Marcus lowered his head and covered his mouth with one hand, trying and failing to hide how much the words had hit him. Naomi let him have that moment. She knew what it meant when a system finally loosened its grip by even an inch. Then her gaze shifted to Officer Daniel Mercer. He had not moved. He looked like a man who had spent years believing consequences belonged to other people. As for the arrest report and testimony before this court, Naomi continued, "I am ordering the matter referred to Internal Affairs and to the District Attorney's Office for immediate review of potential evidentiary misstatements and procedural irregularities." Mercer's face went still in a deeper way than before. Not anger, not even shame fully formed. More like the first hard arrival of reality in a place where arrogance had lived too comfortably for too long. Naomi's voice remained level. "This is not punishment for embarrassment, Officer Mercer. This is what happens when official words carry official weight and are used carelessly around another person's life." Evelyn Hart was already typing the order, the sharp rhythm of the keys sounding almost like rain on glass. Ryan Cole sat down without speaking. He did not look at Mercer. He did not look at anyone. Naomi drew a breath and glanced once toward Marcus Reed. "Mr. Reed," she said, and her tone softened just enough to reach him without losing the bench. "Today does not erase what it cost you to get here. But this court will not add to that cost by pretending a flawed record is good enough." Marcus looked up, eyes bright, shoulders unsteady, and nodded. Naomi returned her attention to the room as a whole. The courtroom that had felt cold when she entered now felt different, not warm exactly, but honest, which in buildings like this was often the closest thing to grace. She lifted the gavel, paused, and looked once more at Mercer, whose laughter from earlier seemed almost impossible now in the silence that surrounded him. "Authority does not become truth because it is spoken loudly," she said. "And prejudice does not become procedure because it wears a badge." Then she brought the gavel down once, clean and final, and the sound moved through the courtroom like a door closing on one version of the morning and opening, at last, on another. For a moment after the gavel fell, nobody moved. The sound seemed to stay in the wood, in the brass rail, in the old grain of the bench, as if the courtroom itself needed a second to understand what had just changed. Judge Naomi Brooks remained seated only long enough to sign the release order and initial the referral packet, now sliding across her bench from Evelyn Hart's steady hands. Her pen moved with the same calm precision that had carried her through the morning. No flourish, no hesitation, only the quiet authority of someone who knew that dignity did not have to announce itself to be felt. Below her, Marcus Reed sat with both hands pressed flat against the table, breathing slowly, as though freedom was something delicate that might vanish if he reached for it too quickly. His mother turned toward him at last, and touched his shoulder with trembling fingers, the smallest gesture in the room, and somehow the one that held the most weight. Ryan Cole gathered his papers without looking up. He seemed older now than he had an hour earlier, not because time had passed, but because certainty had. Officer Daniel Mercer remained where he was, staring at the grain of the counsel table in front of him, as though it might offer a version of the morning he could still survive intact. But there was no refuge left in polished wood or procedure. The record had done what records sometimes did when one honest pair of eyes refused to look away. Naomi rose from the bench, and everyone in the room rose with her, not out of fear, not even out of habit now, but because something about the moment demanded it. She stepped down carefully, the hem of her robe moving softly around her ankles, and handed the signed order to the bailiff for processing. Marcus stood as she approached the front rail, his expression unsteady with gratitude he did not yet know how to shape into words. For a beat, he looked like the teenager he still was, tired, overwhelmed, carrying more than anyone his age should have had to carry into a courthouse before noon. Naomi met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice lower now, meant for the space between them rather than the whole room. "Go home, get some sleep, and let your attorney do the talking for a while." A faint, disbelieving smile touched his mouth. "Yes, ma'am," he said, barely above a whisper. His mother tried to speak, stopped, then pressed a hand to her chest instead. Naomi understood. Some thanks were too full for language. She only inclined her head and turned toward the side aisle. As she passed, Evelyn Hart looked up from the desk with quiet respect bright in her tired eyes. Naomi offered her a brief glance of thanks in return. They both knew mornings like this did not fix the whole machine. They only proved it did not have to stay broken every time. Near the back of the room, sunlight from the high windows had shifted again, warm now where it touched the last row of empty seats. It fell across the place where Naomi had first stood when laughter tried to reduce her to something smaller than she was. The sight caught Mercer's eye too. He looked from that patch of light to Naomi, and for the first time all morning there was nothing defensive left in his face, only the stunned hollowness of a man forced to meet the shape of his own character in public. Naomi did not stop for him. She did not need to. Mercy was not pretending nothing had happened. Sometimes Mercy was simply refusing to become cruel when justice had already spoken. She pushed open the side door to chambers, and just before it closed behind her, the late morning sun poured one clean bar of light